Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, November 21st, 2024. Colonel Douglas Macgregor joins us now. Colonel, thank you so much for accommodating our schedule today. There are two things that I want to talk to you about. I'd like to spend most of our time discussing whatever it is that the Russians fired today in the direction of Dnipro and destroying an arms manufacturing facility. But first, I'd like you to weigh in on the significance of the International Criminal Court indicting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes. The indictment is not one that with which we are familiar. It doesn't come from a grand jury. It comes from a panel of 3 judges, and it's accompanied by an opinion of the judges, which I read. The opinion is clear that the evidence is overwhelming, that the Israeli government has targeted civilians and has moved to prevent them, those who've survived the attacks, from getting food, water, shelter, clothing, and medicines. And those, of course, are war crimes. Is this substantive or just symbolic?
Clearly, it's not just symbolic. Although there is no jurisdiction, obviously, that would result in his arrest either in Israel or here in the United States. We are not signatories to the International Criminal Court and its jurisdiction. So I just think it's a very sad and tragic day. It's a sad and tragic day for Israel, and I think for the United States, because we are, as you point out, complicit. You know, one thing I would note that many Americans do not understand is that the law on the continent of Europe is Napoleonic law. So you have a panel of judges. We are accustomed to English law, which involves a jury. So there is no jury on the continent. You're always judged by a panel. And I think for these judges to reach the conclusion that they had to issue this warrant for his arrest are very serious indeed.
What happens if he has to refuel in Iceland and suddenly is surrounded by military who want to arrest him?
Well, I suppose they could arrest him. I don't think that would happen, certainly not in the Western world. I'd be surprised if it did. But this is a terrible stain on the honor of Israel and the Jewish state, because they're effectively being condemned for committing horrendous atrocities. And I think it's very difficult to avoid this condemnation because that's what's happened in Gaza. And I'm sorry to say, I think something similar has happened in southern Lebanon, because they're not satisfied to simply defeat the Hamas or Hezbollah enemy. They want to drive the population out. And to drive the population out, you have to kill some of the population and also deprive them of shelter, water, food, and everything else. So you destroy the infrastructure deliberately. That's what's happened in both places. And this cannot be concealed much longer from the larger audience in the world, although we've done a pretty good job in the United States, that is, the media has, of concealing it, as you know, Judge.
Right. Are Americans complicit under the same theory? Joe Biden, Lloyd Austin, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, facilitating and paying for the instruments of genocide?
You know, Judge, you're the legal scholar, and you have a better answer for that than I do. I'm disappointed as an American citizen that we have played a role in this simply because we've underwritten it, both financially as well as militarily. We provided everything that the Israelis could possibly need to execute these operations. I think it's a disgrace. I think it's wrong. And I think any American who looks at it would reach that conclusion. I think the assertion that if you don't support this or you're not in support of it, that you're somehow or another an anti-Semite is nonsense. If the people living in Gaza or southern Lebanon were Jews, I would be opposed to it. If they were Italians, if they were Somalis, whatever they are, I would be opposed to it. And I think that's where we Americans ought to ask some hard questions and demand some tough answers from the current government. And I think we should also put those questions to the new president-elect and ask President Trump where he stands on this, because he said several times, I just want him to finish up and get this job done. Well, getting the job done means hundreds of thousands of people are killed, wounded, and driven out of their homes. That's frightening. And I don't know that he's aware of just how extraordinarily criminal this behavior is.
Colonel, let's transition over to Ukraine and Russia. What did the Russians fire at Ukraine today that appears to be different, unique, very powerful, very threatening, or very ominous?
Now, this is a very important question. We have multiple reports coming in, and unfortunately, I do not have access to the information that I could have normally received from the intelligence community. They probably have very definite answers to that question. The first reports that came in suggested either an intercontinental ballistic missile or an intermediate range ballistic missile, hypersonic, which means above Mach 5, could have been Mach 7. You're talking about potentially even going higher than that. And these warheads moving at thousands of feet per second. In other words, these are hypersonic missiles that no weapons that we have in our inventory today can stop. They carried, fortunately, conventional warheads. This means these ballistic missiles left their launching pad and then went into high orbit and then came down and struck these targets. In one case, it may have been a new hypersonic missile that traveled at very low altitude and then struck the target. I don't know the details. The point is, this is a clear and unambiguous signal from President Putin and the Russian state to the United States and the West. Stop what we are doing right now. Do not attack the Russian homeland. This war is effectively at an end. Let it end. Don't try to perpetuate this, because if you continue down this road, you will find yourselves at war with the Russian state and the Russian people. That means that those weapons that were used could be nuclear warheads, multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles. In other words, multiple warheads showering a target with great precision, annihilating everything with potentially a 50-mile radius. This is very serious stuff. I don't think Americans are aware of how seriously these threats that we have made and these attacks that we have sponsored and sought to execute have been taken in Russia. Remember, yesterday I told you that the nuclear forces of the Russian armed forces are in the highest state of alert that they've been in history.
You did.
They are serious. They are very worried. They think that we do want a war with them. They are convinced that we want to destroy them. Now, that may be true for some on the lunatic fringe in the White House or the Hill, but that is not true for the American people. It's not something they voted for. It's not something they want. And that's where we are right now. The churches in Russia are filling up. People are praying in Russia for peace. The government wants peace. Putin wants peace. They're not interested in attacking us or Western Europe. They never have been. But they are responding to what they see as an existential threat to the Russian society.
Scott Ritter reports that an American admiral, a 4-star by the name of Buchanan, made an absurd statement this afternoon that we're prepared to engage in a nuclear conflict with Russia. A, if true, how could he make that without authorization from the Secretary of Defense or even the White House? B, the statement itself defies reality that we're prepared to get into a nuclear conflict with Russia. To what end? The destruction of humanity?
Well, the second question, you've provided the answer. That's absurd. There is no preparation for a nuclear war. A nuclear war would end life on this planet as we know it. It would be Armageddon. The Russians understand that, and we understand it. The Russians feel cornered by what we've done. They think we want to destroy them. They're prepared to fight as well as they can. But the first question, I think, is the most important one. What is this man doing? You know, we've talked about this before. We have too many four-star generals. We look like a banana republic. We have 43, 44 four-star generals and admirals on any given day. These all have headquarters ranging from hundreds to 1,000 people with all sorts of accoutrements and luxurious settings and expensive headquarters. All of these people are presiding over what is effectively military hegemony over the world. They have various areas of the world under their supervision, various fleets, various air forces, armies. And unfortunately, these are much smaller than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, when we had far fewer. But this thing has grown repeatedly, larger and larger. And now these four-star officers think they are effectively Caesars in their own right, that they're policymakers. That's because we've essentially relegated the State Department and the diplomatic corps to tertiary importance. It's a catastrophe for us. This is why diplomacy takes a back seat to military power, and military power is not used for defense. It's used to bully people, just as our trade, tariffs, sanctions, all of those things are designed to bully people, not to enhance our business with others, not to develop commercial relationships, to destroy people that we don't like. The world has had it with us. And this man, Buchanan, I don't know who he is, but he ought to be removed. It's not his place to make a public statement like that. But these people are accustomed to it. He's not the Lone Ranger. These are all demigods in their own right.
How I wish that the president-elect or his transition team is listening to you. You're such a voice of restraint, reason, and preparedness, Colonel. I don't want to get into the politics. Is there any question in your mind but that this device called the Oreshnik was fired in direct response to the American use of ATACMS inside Russia and the British use of Storm Shadows landing inside Russia?
Yes, this is unmistakable. This is a clear, unambiguous signal and message to us. Stop. The next round will not be conventional. The next rounds that fall on you could be nuclear. And we are prepared to do this. We will not submit to you. We will not surrender our sovereignty. We are Russians. We will fight. That's the message. Now, the real question for us is, what in the hell are we doing? We don't want to fight the Russians.
Colonel,
We've never wanted to do that.
I have to interrupt you. Russia is apparently taking seriously the statements by this Admiral Buchanan. And I'm now reading from, Chris, I don't know who this is from, but it looks like it's Sky or RT. Russia urges the United States to exercise restraint after Pentagon statement on exchange of nuclear strikes. Kremlin spokesman reiterates commitment to prevent nuclear conflict, calls on the West to adopt similarly responsible stance. The Russians are being responsible. The Americans are being reckless to the nth degree.
Well, these four stars have been coddled and treated as something more than they are, as though they occupy a position on Mount Olympus. The president of the United States, and I don't know who that is right now, because clearly I don't think President Biden knows what's going on, but certainly Lloyd Austin does. I don't know what his views are, but he ought to immediately inform this man to send in his papers. He is going to be retired from active duty immediately. He is removed from office. His deputy, whoever that is, should take over. That is the only action that will mean anything to the Russians. That needs to happen as soon as possible.
What kind of damage do you know this device, ICBM or whatever you want to call it, did?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how exactly what the parameters of the damage is, because this is a conventional warhead. Remember, these are weapons that were originally designed for nuclear warheads. They're hypersonic, they can't be shot down, and they're designed to shower a target with multiple warheads that are nuclear, which means it's an annihilating strike.
Mm.
We would have seen something that dwarfs Hiroshima. That's what people have to understand. What you saw fall on Hiroshima or Nagasaki were modest in the scale of their destruction compared with what we would have seen if they'd put nuclear warheads on these missiles. This has got to stop. We don't want anything to happen like this. We want it to be over. This is not about who wins and who loses. Everyone loses in a nuclear exchange. We need to prevail upon these people in Kiev to stop. This government needs to stop. We need to get rid of any admirals or generals who are prepared to make reckless public statements. We've had this for too long. A lot of people today don't remember it. When Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, we had this General McPeak from the Air Force who made some reckless comments about reducing Iraq to ashes or a parking lot or something. The Air Force could win the war all on its own, didn't need anybody else. And he was removed just for saying that.
Mm.
And he was replaced by somebody named Fogelman. This is far more serious, Judge. This man is making pronouncements that the Russians think are policy pronouncements. Men in uniform do not make policy. That has to be made very clear. This is out of control.
This person is U.S. Strategic Command spokesman, Rear Admiral Thomas Buchanan. There he is. Now, I'd never heard of this fellow. I don't know if you have. He's a Rear Admiral, so he's not 4 stars. I was mistaken on that. Colonel, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the most serious, how serious has this become in the past 3 days?
10.
Oh.
This Rear Admiral, who's probably a 2-star, and they have Rear Admiral upper half, lower half in the Navy. I suspect he's a 1 or a 2. Not only should he be instantly removed from his position, whoever his boss is, whoever the 4-star in charge is, he should be removed. You've got to make an example of this. These people do not make policy. That spokesman would never have said a thing like that unless he was comfortable doing so.
Right.
The only way he could be comfortable is if he heard his boss make these statements.
What good was accomplished by President Biden or someone in his name authorizing the use of the American ATACMS, programmed by Americans, fired by Americans, and the comparable behavior by the Prime Minister of Great Britain? What conceivable good came from that, from their perspective?
I think these people are confused, and they think that somehow or another they are signaling how strong they are as leaders. This doesn't signal anything but sheer stupidity. This is more bluster and bluff that they ought to restrain. You know, it's hard to even fathom this. I can't imagine anyone back in the 1960s or 70s making comments like this. Everyone seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, and people that didn't were ultimately removed. These people don't know what they're doing. This man, I guess it's Strike Command, has no business making these statements. Policy rests exclusively with the civilian leadership, elected and appointed. Now, these appointed and elected leaders, if they're behind this, then they are suicidal. They are psychopaths. There is no win in this war. Nothing good has been accomplished for Ukraine. Because of us, because of our insistence on trying to harm Russia, millions of people have been driven from their homes. Millions of people have been hurt, harmed, either physically or otherwise. We don't know how many have died. The media have never told the truth. It's at least 700,000 dead Ukrainians, at least, and hundreds of thousands more wounded who will never recover. No one is telling the truth. It's time for the truth. If President Trump does anything, he's got to tell the truth and throw out anyone who doesn't provide him with the truth.
I don't want to aggravate you further, but now we have a direct quote from him. I don't know who General Cotton is, but he says, now this is Admiral Buchanan saying, General Cotton has designated 2024 as the year of action, and 2025 now becomes the year of acceleration, and we are moving out on that end. If and when directed by the president, we are ready to prevail in conflict. Make no bones about it. That's what our forces, your forces, the Air Force, Navy forces that make up the three legs of the triad do every day. Prepare for that potential eventuality. The potential eventuality of which he speaks is nuclear. This is lunacy.
Well, Judge, first of all, the last part of his statement is correct. They're expected to be ready to fight. That's not the issue here. What's strange is the necessity to say it publicly in the way he has.
Right.
Do you understand? I mean, everybody in uniform is always expected to be ready to fight. That is everyone from private through 4 stars, regardless of service. But to come forth now and make that statement in connection with the previous statement that we're prepared for nuclear war at a point in time when the Russians have taken this very seriously and have sent this unmistakable message is extremely ill-advised. It's unwarranted. It should be stopped.
Does the
Someone
Pentagon
has to get control? This government is on autopilot. Who the hell is in charge?
Right. Well, we don't know who's in charge, Colonel, as you pointed out a little while ago. Knowing the mentality of the Pentagon as you do they understand the gravity of what happened with the use of this weapon and the significance of the statement by this admiral?
I can't speak for the people who are in the building today. When I was on active duty, and this goes back to 2004 and earlier, yes, all the senior officers were very sensitive to this reality. I don't know what they are now. I don't know them personally. I think that Lloyd Austin, if he does nothing else, should stand up and say enough is enough and silence everybody and remove this spokesman along with his boss. And he should be backed in that by the president of the United States, who is the commander in chief, or whomever is telling the president what to do. Because we don't want to become involved in a nuclear conflict with Russia, China, or anyone, anywhere. And we need to wake up, because this is a foretaste of what's coming in the Middle East. Because inevitably in the Middle East, we are going to run into this again. It may not be Russia. It may be Iran. It may be Israel, but it's coming again. We've got to get a hold of ourselves and live in the world that exists, not a fantasy world in which we hold all the cards, we call all the shots. That's over.
Colonel, this weapon that the Russians used, do we have a comparable weapon?
Not right now, no. Now, one of the other weapons, yes, but not hypersonic. Well, that's misleading, because all of your intercontinental ballistic missiles that are launched from the continental United States against targets on the Eurasian landmass or anywhere else, they are hypersonic when they re-enter the atmosphere. But this latter weapon that you referred to, with which I'm not personally familiar, is very frightening, because it appears to have taken a very low altitude flight path and is frighteningly surprising in its lethality, speed, and impact.
Can it be shot down?
Right now, the answer to that is no. And this is another myth. We've been dealing with this Star Wars myth forever. I recall when I was on active duty, a Russian senior officer said quite bluntly, if you want to dig giant holes in the ground in Alaska and waste your time trying to put missiles in it that would eventually shoot down another ICBM, you can do it. But they realized back in those days, you can't stop the ICBM. If you can break the laws of fractal mathematics at some point, relate light, gravity, and magnetism, then you have energy fields. All sorts of things are possible. But today, it is technologically impossible for us to stop intercontinental ballistic missiles. And this oceanic missile is another example of a hypersonic weapon that we cannot stop.
Colonel Macgregor, thank you very much. Your message is loud and clear, and I hope it's being heard in Washington and in Mar-a-Lago. I have a feeling it's being heard in both. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your gifted and courageous and clear analysis, my dear friend. We have a short week next week. Who knows what the news cycle will be? I hope we can spend a little time together.
Thanks, Judge.
Thank you. This is devastating what we're going through, dear friends. From a professional level, I'm deeply grateful to have people like Scott Ritter and Colonel Douglas Macgregor. From a human perspective, it's terrifying what the government is trying to get away with. Morris, we get it. The boys will be here tomorrow at 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon. You'll see the announcement. That's the Intelligence Community Roundtable. And as usual, on a Friday afternoon, we'll wrap up everything for you. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.